There will be now that I've pressed the sound button. So everybody on YouTube just saw me speak silently for a whole 2 minutes, so that's terrible. That's just par for the course, I guess. When we're in our union meetings, I always tell our folks not to apologize when you speak while muted. So I'm going to not speak while I'm not going to apologize either, because this is just the world we live in. When we do our introductions again, our candidates were the most important to hear our format. But why don't we go through the introductions one more time while folks can hear us, and then we'll move on to our opening statements. Sorry about that, friends. Okay, so first off, I want to introduce, we've got Rebecca. She's going to put our questions in the chat. Awesome. Emma, if you could give us a wave as our timekeeper. Super. And then in alphabetical order, our candidates: Barbara Biley, candidate of the Marxist-Leninist Party. Yay, thank you. Gordjon's candidate for New Democratic Party. Great. Suzanne Farlinger, Liberal Party of Canada. Awesome. Suzanne Lawson, Green Party of Canada. Great. We just got better at it, didn't we? Barbara's going to begin with the 2-minute opening statement, and then our first question will start with Gord, and we'll progress from there. Thank you to everyone on YouTube, and sorry while we left you in silence. Actually, I'm going to take one more second to cycle back, because then you folks didn't get to hear our land acknowledgement, which I think is important too. So, North Island Students' Union is honored to acknowledge territories of 35 distinct First Nations, the Nuu-chah-nulth, Quaqua, and Coast Salish nations, on whose unceded lands we learn, live, and play. I invite everybody to take a moment to acknowledge the land keepers from where you're joining us from. There's a really great tool, www.whos.land, if you're unsure of who to acknowledge in your own area. All right, now without further ado, Barbara, may I invite you to start us off with your 2-minute opening statement?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm coming to you from Toronto, and I did not have time to get the exact appropriate acknowledgement, but I live on the territory, the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation. Greetings to Gord and others that I haven't met before, and to the students and other participants, and thank you very much to the organizers for doing this. The Prime Minister's calling of the election in the conditions of the pandemic sharply illustrates the need for democratic renewal in Canada. He called the election in spite of the fact that we have fixed election date legislation, that his government was in no danger of falling, that Parliament voted unanimously in May that there would not be an election during the pandemic, and in the face of broad public opposition. Without any sense of shame, he claimed it was so Canadians could have a voice, when precisely that is the problem, that Canadians have no say in this and other important decisions that affect our lives. Our electoral system puts all powers in the hands of political parties which come to power, then claim a mandate to do as they please. There is no accountability. Not even members of the cartel parties, including MPs, have a say in the decisions that are made. What is discussed or not discussed in Parliament is decided by a small but powerful elite that have seized control of Parliament and the legislatures and command the parties in power to act in accordance with their aims. Likewise, the issues in the election are predetermined by the parties vying for power, media, and pundits, with the people completely on the sidelines. How to change the situation? Canadians have been speaking out and demanding that their claims on society be met in an unprecedented way over the course of the pandemic. The pandemic and public health measures needed to control it have exposed the damage that decades of neoliberal wrecking have done to the healthcare and education systems. Many people who did not qualify for CERB were left to fend for themselves, while companies like Amazon and the banks are reaping obscene profits. News today was released from a UBC report that Vancouver is the eviction capital of Canada, with the rest of the province not far behind.
Okay,
Student
that's
debt,
2 minutes.
accessibility to education, and the irrationality of a critical shortage of, for example, healthcare workers because there are waiting lists for limited spots in educational programs can only be explained.
Sorry, Barbara, well past the 2-minute mark. Gord, 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, great. I'm having to do this from my iPhone, so I apologize because I'm having technical difficulties. But great to be joining you today from the unceded lands of Sishat and Gupashesset in the Nuu-chah-nulth territories. And I want to thank Rebecca and obviously Carissa and everyone who's helped organize tonight's event, with the North Island College Student Union. And certainly want to thank everybody in our riding for joining, especially those students that are attending. I first ran for public office as a municipal councillor in the district of Tofino, which gave me an opportunity to speak out on environmental, social, and economic issues on the west coast of Vancouver Island, to form partnerships with First Nations, because we learned that together we can accomplish so much more than apart. And I launched my own eco store and learned much about the struggle of small business in an era when big corporations were dominating even our local economies. I signed on as the executive director of the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce and quickly learned that much could be accomplished by working together. In 2015, I stood for election as the Member of Parliament for the new riding of Courtenay, Alberni, and I was not happy with the Conservative representation in our area. Our MP was invisible. He occupied a seat, but he didn't stand up for our environment, for First Nations, for the salmon, or for coastal values. I spent my first term working on a national ocean plastic strategy with the support and hard work of local environmental organizations, the Environmental Law Centre at the University of Victoria, and my motion passed unanimously by all parties because I took the time to talk to MPs on all sides of the House of Commons from a local driven movement, and it led to the government's ban on some single-use plastics starting at the end of the year. We want to go much further. And I was elected in 2019 and became the NDP critic for fisheries and oceans, and I've spoken now on Pacific wild salmon in Parliament more frequently than any member of Parliament in Canadian history. My work on a national cycling strategy has led to the creation of a multi-million-dollar active transportation infrastructure fund to create trails and bike paths across Canada. And none of my work could have been done or even been possible, of course, without the support of community organizations, activists, and everyday Canadians who care about our environment and social and economic justice.
Sorry, Gord, that's the 2 minutes mark. Thank you so much. I know it's tough. It's hard to say everything you want. Susan, you're going to be up next, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm speaking to you from the unceded land of the Snaas First Nation from Nanuus. And thank you for having us all here tonight and the opportunity to have this conversation. I am the Liberal Party candidate for this federal election. I have not been a participant in politics before, except as a citizen of the country. And I decided to step up. Why did I decide to do that? Because I see the biggest challenges, certainly of my lifetime and probably of all our lifetimes, on our doorstep. Climate change, the impacts of climate change, the need to reduce emissions and how that will change our lives in many ways, and the need to be supported, to adapt and change to create sustainable futures. The International Panel on Climate Change reminded us very recently of the urgency of adaptation and reducing emissions. Reconciliation, it must happen more quickly. We need reconciliation and, as my colleague said, working together on the ground. The communities are diverse here in this riding. They're widespread. And there is a need to work not only amongst those communities, but through the levels of government, up and down, municipal, First Nation, local, volunteer, provincial, and federal. There's a lot that goes on here, and we need to figure out the role of each of these governments, encourage them and support them in working together, and ensure that we work together on the ground to come up with the kind of solutions that will take us to a more sustainable future here. We have many, many changes to make here on the ground. Our historical reliance on forestry and harvesting of fish will stay with us, but it needs to change, and it needs to change.
So sorry, that was 2 minutes. It's so tough. I apologize. Suzanne, we'd love to hear from you, please.
Hello, my name is Suzanne Lawson. I'm the Green Party, your Green Party of Canada representative in the Courtenay, Alberni riding. I'm fortunate to live in the Cleopiat First Nations unceded territory here on the West Coast. I've also had a lot of experience and relationships with all the First Nations in this area, the Inuit, the Hausa, the Inuit, other First Nations of the Newfoundland, as well as the Claudians. It's an honor to have known many of the elders from these communities and worked My late partner was First Nations, and my grandchildren, some of them are Cleoquit, some of them are all First Nations. And yes, worked with my late partner across the country with the First Nations Environmental Network, going to different communities, visiting them in their challenges dealing with environmental issues, and learned a great deal from the elders. And it's their teachings that have guided me in my relationship with the land a great deal. I started my environmental career 35 years ago, making a film called for the Pierce Commission on Salmon Fishing called the BC Chainsaw Massacre. I've worked in environmental issues across the country and mostly on Vancouver Island because I am dedicated to the future of my children, my grandchildren, and all life on this planet. It's something that I'm very, very passionate about, and I've worked on environmental issues here on Vancouver Island, trying to protect Strathcona Park from further mining, trying to stop the trophy hunting of the bears, trying to stop fish farms from the diseases and the pollution that they were causing, trying to stop the old growth logging here in Clayoquot Sound, something I went to prison for 35 years ago. These are things that came in between my life, environmental issues, raising children, grandchildren, providing and making art, which is what I do professionally and still am very busy with. I've had shows in New York and around the world, and have big pieces in the city of Winnipeg, on the West Coast, and public places. I'm here to try to make the changes that are necessary, that we are facing the enormous challenges at this point. And I really feel that if we
Awesome, thank you. That was 2 minutes. So that was everybody's opening statements, and thank you very much. We're going to move on to our first question, and Gord is going to be our first, and then Susan is after. Currently, North Island Students Union is providing extended health and medical services to members for less than $23 a month. Do you have plans to expand healthcare to include pharmacare, counseling, and or paramedical services such as physiotherapy? Gord?
Oh, it's a great question, Carissa. And first, before I even get started on answering the question, I do want to thank all of my colleagues and fellow candidates for stepping up and having the courage to do so, and for their own work in their own right. You know, Susan in fisheries, and Suzanne, you know, her activism on the environment, and Barb in healthcare. They're all really critical what they've been doing in our communities. So it's always humbling to be on a stage with such incredible people. In terms of offering, you know, in our platform, and what we've been calling for is a head-to-toe healthcare system, one that, you know, mental health is covered, and we know how COVID has impacted mental health for students. Even my own daughter, who's in fourth year university at the University of Ottawa, and my youngest, who's in grade 11, it's had a huge impact in terms of the learning environment, ensuring that we have adequate mental health supports, a pharmacare system so that people aren't making a choice of whether they're going to get their medicine when they need it or not. Even mental health people require medication often, and they're not able to access it. A dental care so that people can get the dental work done and don't get sick. These are absolutely critical pieces to our platform, and we can pay for it. Right now, the super rich are getting richer every day. We're going to tax the ultra rich and ensure that they pay their fair share. With a 1% tax on the ultra rich, we're going to make big corporations like Amazon finally pay their fair share in Canada, and tax havens. $25 billion a year is leaking in tax havens. And Canada's biggest corporations have had a $78 billion profit. We can afford to do this. We can do better. We must do better. And the opportunity is huge, especially for students that are struggling more and more with affordability. So that's our proposal, is to ensure that a head-to-toe healthcare system where everybody gets the coverage they need, especially young people. You're facing so many challenges: a climate emergency, the opioid crisis, a housing crisis, and an affordability crisis. These are things that will help make your life better. These are commitments from the NDP that we're putting forward, and we can't afford them.
Thank you. Susan?
Hello, and thanks. If elected, the Liberal government will increase access to mental health care. not only by providing additional targeted specific transfers to the provinces and territories. As you know, the healthcare system is delivered to the provinces, and provinces make decisions about how that funding and support is allocated. So in this case, this is a targeted transfer to the jurisdictions for mental health care. In addition, the Liberal government will support mental health care by hiring up to 1,200 new counsellors for colleges and universities. So these are people specifically targeted at colleges and university. On pharmacare, the Liberal government has begun the process of implementing pharmacare with the signing of a first agreement with Prince Edward Island. And finally, a government has advanced a child care program in the budget and has signed agreements with 8 of the provinces and territories. And that child care program commits to $10 a day child care, and also commits to having current child care costs to 50% within 1 year. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you so much. Suzanne?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear that noise in the background? No? Anyway, I think after being a student at McGill University with hundreds and hundreds of other students and going to a French university and the challenges that I dealt with in Montreal, I remember clearly how stressful it was many times. And I feel that it's really an important factor to have health and well-being consultations, whatever students need to be able to secure a comfortable, secure place in the university and feel that they can move forward. I really believe that it's important to have support for not just physical therapy and things like that, but alternative health care, like things that will help them to have good herbal medicines and natural medicines and things that will show them that they have abilities to heal themselves and make sure that they cannot be stressed out by university demands and the pressures that we're all facing at this time on the planet. They are the ones that are inheriting this future, and they must have incredible stressful thoughts about what they are inheriting, and we have to do everything we can to make sure that their future is got a doorway that they feel secure and comfortable in, and that we need to redirect funds that are going to transnational corporations that are getting off tax-free, that to supporting our youth and our young people and our upcoming students, that these are our future. And if we don't have healthy, confident young people, what kind of a future do we have? They are the most important reason I am running right now in this election. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Barbara?
Just unmuted. Okay, I'm going to go back to where I left off in my opening remarks about the necessity for people's empowerment. Imagine what an empowered people could accomplish. We need a change in the direction of the economy. Healthcare workers, education workers, students, and all Canadians can decide how to develop the economy for the benefit of the people and not the monopolies who extract and ship resources and move production in and out of communities according to their needs without regard to workers, communities, Indigenous rights, and protection of the environment. A portion of the wealth created in the economy, taxed at the point of production, must be invested in healthcare and education under a public authority with private profit prohibited, so that without user fees, healthcare would be provided to everyone to cover all needs, including medications, dental care, home care, long-term care, and housing for seniors and people with disabilities, free post-secondary education, and other financial assistance for students as a social responsibility. The housing crisis can be solved by making land public common property that cannot be bought or sold, with public enterprises established to build and maintain housing according to needs of communities. No more speculation, no more profiteering, no more homelessness. That's it for this point.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Moving on to the next question, we're going to start with Susan. In the light of the climate crisis, how will our riding, our region, and Canada as a whole transition our economy from traditional resource extraction to sustainable work practices?
As I noted in my introduction, one of my reasons for choosing to run for the Liberals is the fact that the Liberals have not only recognized and acknowledged the future that is ahead of us, but the immediate steps we need to take and put out a comprehensive plan for getting there. At the same time, a plan that includes elements of be emphasized and brought together and supported in order to bring together a renewable energy future document on what's been done to Canada's action plan, and how
Oh heck, I think technical difficulties got the better of her there, and I think she's dropped right off the call, so we're gonna move on to Suzanne.
Hi there, I'm back.
Oh, you're in the pitch dark, dear.
Well, I'm closer to my wireless router.
Okay, yeah, it was very robotic on your last question there.
Okay.
Okay, we'll give you a minute to reset.
Why doesn't somebody else go ahead and come back to me after I plug in
Sounds good.
the wireless here?
Okay, Suzanne, please. Suzanne, are you there? Green Party? Also in the dark. Okay, we'll come back as well. Barbara. And you're muted, so 1 second, please. Let's just living that best Zoom life, everybody.
Okay.
There we go.
I just unmuted myself.
Perfect. Thank you, dear.
The climate crisis. A very interesting thing took place in the Comox Valley, and I think it was 2010. The federal government conducted hearings on the Northern Gateway pipeline in the Comox Valley, and the Northern Gateway pipeline came nowhere near the Comox Valley, and I think they expected an easy ride, and they didn't get an easy ride. Over 2,000 people showed up to protest the Northern Gateway pipeline because that decision was made without any consideration for the people who live on the coast. And the banners that we had there were "Our Coast, Our Decision." That's what it basically comes down to, whether we're talking about forestry or fish farms or food security or all the myriad ways that our economy is organized. Right now, it's in the hands of the monopolies who do as they please without regard to the environment, without regard to the consequences for workers and communities. And that is what we need to bring under control. We need to change the direction of the economy. We need to have people discussing and making decisions about these very important questions in their communities, in the province, in the country, on the basis of meeting the needs of Canadian people, not the needs of monopolies that come to invest and exploit the resources. That's it.
Wonderful, thank you. Gord, we'll move to you next, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of climate change, I mean, it's pretty wild when we're having drought to the point where, communities are burning like Lytton. our wild salmon are struggling to make it up the rivers. We've had flooding. 3 of the last 5 years, we've had record years of flooding. Smoky skies are becoming the norm. Acidification of the ocean, warming temperatures. Our wild salmon are in deep trouble. We're in a wild salmon crisis. The climate emergency isn't being treated like an emergency. And I'm really concerned because everything we're talking about tonight, it doesn't matter if we don't deal with the climate crisis. And we've heard the Prime Minister, he declares a climate emergency one day, and the next day he buys a pipeline. I mean, it just shows, how out of touch he is with the seriousness of the situation. I mean, building pipelines right now is absolutely, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And, I think about the Conservatives. Their plan is actually to expand and build more pipelines. And I was with Barb at the protests in Courtenay, and we stood up as coastal people to defend our coast. And New Democrats stood up hard to stop the Enbridge pipeline on the North Coast. Nathan Cullen led the charge there. And, we're going to continue to fight against expansion of pipelines to the coast. But really, we need to do everything we can to limit the temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we need to take action immediately. We need to cut emissions by 50% by 2030. That's a commitment of our party. We need to invest in clean energy efficient, affordable homes, electric transit, and zero emission vehicles. Retrofit all homes across the country and create a climate bank to invest in fighting the climate emergency. We need more accountability. We need to appoint a climate emergency committee of cabinet, which still hasn't been done. We need a climate accountability office, so there's independent oversight to meet targets, to make sure that we actually can achieve our goals. And we need to invest in conservation financing, especially with Indigenous protected areas. And Indigenous peoples have to be full and equal partners as we take on this climate emergency. It's absolutely essential. And just in contrast, the Liberals put $18 billion in oil and gas subsidies a year, and they put $2.3 billion in conservation and financing.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Gord. That was well over 2 minutes. We're going to circle back, and Susan from the Liberal Party will let you have 2 minutes again. You really were quite robotic and then lost your spot.
Oh, sorry about that. The wireless isn't as good as it might be. So I agree with everything that's been said, but I think the big difference is the Liberals have looked at this from a comprehensive point of view, and they have underway a significantly complex and costed climate response program. In the document I referred to, which is available to everyone on canada.ca, 79 pages of things that are underway, have been completed, or about to be done. So these include a description of how we're going to reach net zero emissions by 2050. How and why we're moving to that. How are we going to do it? It's there for you to read. Carbon pollution pricing. How and why there's a price on carbon pollution, the impact on greenhouse gas emissions, and how these proceeds are returned to Canadians. Adapting to climate change in Canada, a vital issue for us here in these two ridings. Protecting and improving human health, reducing climate-related risks, making infrastructure, natural areas, and the economy climate resilient, measuring progress. The commitments to protect land and water are proceeding faster. They are going to be in place by 2030. We have also expert engagement initiative as part of this strategy. How has this been accomplished since 2015? By working with allies. That's why we have a new target with Paris Agreement. Implementing the first ever emission agreement with all the jurisdictions in this country, provinces and territories. Lots of work. Providing incentives to small business and to homeowners. Creating the Canada Digital Adoption Program and providing direct subsidies for change.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then Suzanne from the Green Party.
Can you hear me now? I've lived off-grid for over 50 years here on the coast. I've raised my children understanding their use of solar, heat, light, water, wood, whatever it takes. They all understand that they have to conserve. They have to make it a full circle. That whatever they're going to use, they're going to have to be careful, and they're going to have to contribute to that. I think that retrofitting homes would be a great way to start people getting off the dependency of hydropower. I think we need to build small, tiny homes and communities where we live with less footprint. I think that I know the solar panels I use are so modern right now that they can actually get light power from moonlight. There are so many technologies that are available to us now, and they're not difficult, they're simple. And we can transition to a new green environment. And everyone has to do that, even the corporations like oil and gas. They're not doing well financially because lots of people don't really support that. And so we are going to have to transition, not just because of the climate, but because we are being forced to choose better alternatives to our lives. And if we don't do that soon, it's just going to get worse. So it doesn't matter whether you're a single person, a family, or a corporation, everyone is going to have to make a greener choice. I don't think it's just a green party we need, but it's a green movement around the world, locally, provincially, federally, and globally. And COVID has taught us that we can do this. We are all in this together and everything is connected. I know that we can transition, and it's not going to be too difficult, but we're going to have to say no to the things that are really harming us and destroy the environment that we care about. We have to bring it back into balance. We have to show the corporations that there is a positive way of moving forward. I think that it's not an impossible thing, and everybody can benefit from it and be prosperous. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I'm gonna add, when Emma gives us the thumbs up warning for the 10 seconds, I'm gonna flash my hands too, so it might be a bit easier if you have got two folks just to help you keep on time. That's for everybody. And in order to keep us on our speaking track for the rest of the questions, actually, Suzanne, you're gonna speak first for this next question as well. So, building new houses seems to be a major plan for most housing policies during this election. New houses are not usually rented at affordable rates. How do you plan to create housing that will be available for students to rent at affordable rates?
I have a tiny house in Tofino that I use. It's not a very big place, but it suits me fine. It gives me everything I need. As a senior, I'm very grateful to have something like that. It's on one of my children's property. I think we need to make housing affordable, not just for students, which would be great to have on campus or establish land nearby to the learning facilities to make sure that they don't have a long way to travel. We can do this by making sure that there's land given to the areas by the municipal and provincial and federal governments to make that available for tiny homes, for container homes. We can put people to work in really positive ways where we start to understand that we can have communities where students and seniors and even the unhoused and battered women or just young people who can't afford rents any longer and want to stay in an area. We need to establish those kind of situations where all of us can move forward and have community and yet have something that's not demanding. We can't afford to carry on with this kind of housing and a rental crisis that we're dealing with. It's just unheard of. There's no way that a student can afford to live in an area unless we start capping rents and capping prices of local places for people to be able to live in affordable accommodation. I think it's totally doable. We just have to have the strength to say we need this land, and we're going to set that aside for tiny homes for students near the universities and near the colleges where they're going to school, and build on a community that way. Establish that for seniors as well. And I heard a lot from some of the people in Courtenay, Alberni, of the unhoused. and they taught me a lot. And they were based on tiny home development. So I think it's possible. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Barbara?
I have to unmute. Yeah, I don't think there's any solution to the housing crisis without restricting the power of developers and speculators to be able to make a killing on the market based on pricing housing at what the market will bear, without any relation to what the needs of people are, what the needs of students, of seniors, of young families, of all different sections of the people. I think it's a very serious proposal that land should not be privately owned, that land should be public, that the state should develop enterprises under the control of the workers and people of the country to determine what housing is needed in what areas, and that housing be removed from an area where corporate power runs amok without any restrictions whatsoever. We need to restrict corporate power. We need to base housing policy on meeting the needs of the people. And for that, we need to make significant changes to how we are governed. Because right now, how we are governed is that the people in Parliament are forced to accept the status quo and forced to adjust to a situation where the big monopolies, oligarchs, especially in areas like seniors housing and new housing, determine what is going to be built without regard to whether or not it can be afforded, without regard to whether or not it meets the needs of actual real living people. Thank you.
Thank you. Gord?
Yeah, right now, we've seen real estate in our riding grow the price of an average home at 32% just over the last year. It's just so far out of reach for working families, never mind students, and as Barb outlined, seniors. A third of women over 65 are living in poverty. They have no hope of finding a home, and never mind if they move out of their housing right now, because we're seeing what happens when people are rent evicted or moving out of their housing. They can't find a replacement home because they can't afford the market prices. It's not just in Courtenay, Oceanside. We've seen prices grow to $850,000 for the average price of a home. Tofino, it's well over $1 million. I was talking to a real estate agent in Tofino. He said for the last 2 years, he hasn't seen one home sell that has been rented out to workers. And there's no wonder that employers can't find staff. We're losing housing stock, not building housing stock. Now, back in the 70s and 80s, Canada built 25,000 units of non-market housing a year. I grew up in co-op housing, safe, secure housing. It was rent controlled. Basically, my dad was a transmission mechanic. My mother worked as a clerk. They helped subsidize seniors, people living on disability, single parents. It was an excellent model. And in the early 90s, the Liberals pulled out of it. And the Conservatives, of course, they believe the free market's going to solve our problems. I wish the Conservatives were here today joining this debate, because it's not going to solve the problems. We need 500,000 units right now of non-market housing. And, Rebecca knows, that she's a former city councillor in Courtenay, how important it is to have the federal government put some money on the table. The provincial government's building half the non-market housing in the country. They need a federal partner, and they need to do it quickly, because young people are losing hope. Not just the climate crisis, but this crisis is serious, and they need to be supported.
Awesome. Thank you, Gord. Susan?
I take it the thumbs up means I'm out of time, right?
Okay, I think that means my turn. Affordable housing. As we've heard a little bit about, the strategic approach to this is to look at what we have. We have a supply and demand model. It has driven prices, particularly here where people are moving from places probably where they got more when they sold their homes or whatever holdings they had before they came here. And are able to build something larger, more expensive, while still there are people here, as Barbara and Gord have pointed out, seniors, students, people who are living on the streets. The problems are different than the supply and demand market. And so the proposals put forward by the Liberal Party approach this broadly. Firstly, increasing housing stock. That's not going to solve all our problems, but it is part of a solution. 1.4 million houses are committed in the Liberal plan. Secondly, regulating how that supply and demand market works. So a pause on foreign ownership to look at how those residences are being used and to consider how to regulate the use of those residences, building on the very first 1% national tax on vacant houses that the Liberal government put into place. Regulation around flipping houses, requiring houses to be held for at least a year. Taking a look at not only housing stocks, but then moving over, while you're looking at the structure of housing, which will affect everything. It will affect ownership and it will affect rentals. Moving over to permanently increase funding to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund by $2.7 billion, more than double the current allocation. This is dedicated to helping affordable housing providers.
That's
and the
2
kind
minutes.
of solutions that we're hearing about from Suzanne.
Sorry, I have to cut you off. I'm so sorry. Moving on to question 4. Barbara is going to start this question. I'm sorry, Suzanne is still speaking. Number 4. What will you do to create a BC where all people have access to affordable education? And we're going to start with Barbara, please.
I'm to unmute. Okay, you can hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Parties can promise you anything. Trudeau promised in 2015 that that would be the last election that was first past the post. That hasn't happened. We've been promised that the federal government and provincial government would sign on to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. They've actually done that in BC and federally, and still the RCMP is assaulting Indigenous people at Fairy Creek, and the Wet'suwet'en do not have safety and security on their own land because the RCMP is a constant threat and presence. So how does this relate to the question that you've asked? It relates this way, that without control over the decisions that are made that affect our lives, it's wonderful. Everybody can promise the moon. The Liberals who have been in power and haven't done the things they're promising to do next, why would you elect somebody that had power, didn't do it, and now they're going to do it? It's ridiculous. We think that a very serious problem exists in Canada of democracy, that we need to gain control of the situation. We have some very specific proposals. We propose the election of a constituent assembly to write a modern constitution for Canada, which vests sovereignty in the people, which can be discussed and adopted by referendum. In terms of the electoral system, we think that MPs, once elected, should form government and elect the prime minister from amongst their ranks. And we get rid of this archaic notion of parties in power, but our elected representatives should act as the representatives and collectively form government. We think that the political process, the electoral process, should be funded and not political parties. And I got the warning, so I'll stop talking now.
Awesome. Okay, for clarity, Emma is putting the thumbs up emoji on the screen, but I think it's hard to see when we're in spotlight mode. So when she puts that up, that's when you've got 10 seconds and to wrap up what you're saying. So I've been flashing up my digits there to give you the warning, and we'll give you 10 seconds to wind down. And then when you go past 2 minutes, I will mute you and move you on to the next speaker, just so that we can have the opportunity to hear from everybody. Gord, same question, your turn.
Yeah, so it's around making more affordable for education, correct? So, I mean, young people right now in Canada, they need hope. They need to know that there's better options for them in the future, and there is. Um, we need to help take off the pressure. There's already huge debt loads, finding an affordable place to live, the climate anxiety, the rising cost of post-secondary education. We need to end, all student loan interest immediately. Our proposal is, you probably heard Jagmeet Singh announced it again the other day, to invest $4.2 billion into post-secondary education, a $20,000 credit, up to $20,000 credit towards those that are attending post-secondary education, whether it be in the trades or in a college or university. But also, we need to make sure that we permanently double the Canada Student Loan Grant and provide more affordable housing. Back to the affordable housing, making things more affordable for students. A national childcare plan. We're short 600 spaces in the Comox Valley right now alone, and it's a 2-year waiting list if you've got a 4-year-old. How is that going to get people into post-secondary? Women have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID emergency, and they need support, and all parents do. That this is something that we prioritize. We understand how good it is for the economy, but also it's critical to students, especially Indigenous students. We're hearing it's one of the top needs of theirs to be able to participate in post-secondary education. Cell phone rates. We pay some of the highest cell phone rates in the world. And some people laugh it off, think it's no big deal. It's a huge deal for students. It's an extremely high cost for students, and it's a barrier for them, and internet costs. So it's important that we address that. And of course, people saw New Democrats during COVID step it up for students, ensure that students got support. Justin Trudeau was going to abandon students. We saw that happening, and when the emergency started. And we fought hard for students. We'll continue to do that. And I was part of the campaign, speaking in the House of Commons about knocking off the interest. I was proud to carry that message to Ottawa on behalf of many of the students that are watching tonight.
Thank you, Gord. Susan of the Liberal Party.
Thank you. I hear a wish list, much I agree with. The federal interest, of course, and support that was provided to students through COVID, I think, made a very big difference. But moving forward, what are we going to do? Permanently eliminate the federal interest. And not only on student loans, but Canada Apprentice loans. Fund the hiring, as I said earlier, of 1,200 new counselors to support access to mental health care at colleges and universities. Allow new parents to pause repayment of their loans until their children are 5 years old. And why are we talking about a new healthcare system? We already have agreements prior to this election with 8 provinces and territories across this country by the first federal government prepared to put this forward. Invest $500 million over 4 years to support Indigenous operated post-secondary institution. Strengthen access to federally funded scientific research, and $30 million over 5 years to allow graduate students to mentor and aid new students coming in. This is a program that actually is about action, not just a list of what's wrong.
Awesome, thank you. Suzanne, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Yeah. I think that we're going to address some of these issues in the last question when we're talking about student loans and interest-free loans. But I really think that we need to redirect subsidies into our youth and into our education sector. We need to set up an education center in each province where funding for the students, whether they be high school, college, or university, trades, apprenticeship programs, where they can apply to this fund, and each university or institution can help them with this process, and then they can receive funding, whether it be for housing to accommodate them, because some places are different. Some places have student housing, some don't. They can address food security. They can address books and materials. They can address, and that kind of funding should be across the board, so that will ease their situation, whether including health as well, where they can apply to this fund and be subsidized in order to continue their education, whether it be in any of those avenues. That's a suggestion, one of them. I think that is for immediate time, because we need to subsidize the students right now as we are transitioning. Once we transition and we start the transitioning process, I think we'll have quite an amazing positive future in front of us when all these things start to move forward. But those are my suggestions for the immediate solution of dealing with some of the problems that students are facing right now.
Awesome, thank you so much. We're about halfway through, so I'm just going to quickly switch to gallery mode for 1 second, and I've noticed everyone's camera is on, so I am going to set us up to take a little screenshot so we can commemorate our lovely time together. So I'm going to count down, and if everyone could just give me a nice smile right up in your camera. 3, 2, 1. Awesome, thank you. We're going to move on to question 5, and we're going to start with Gord. If you are a non-Indigenous person, what steps have you taken to educate yourself about how Indigenous people are experiencing life in Canada today? If you are Indigenous, can you share how sharing your experience as an Indigenous person informs your work?
It's a really important question. I'm not Indigenous. I have been fortunate to have witnessed a lot of Indigenous suffering and some of the challenges Indigenous people face. My father, who adopted me when I was quite young, is Indigenous. He's Cree from the Fisher River Nation in Manitoba. I haven't had his lived experience, but I've certainly witnessed a lot of the pain and suffering of his family, my aunts and uncles, and my late grandma, especially around some of the discriminatory and racist policies that have been imposed on his family. And in our communities, in the communities where I live, certainly in the Nuu-Chah-Nulth territory, I've been also a witness to the systemic racism that continues today, but also the issues that have been the impact of the systemic policies of Canada on Indigenous peoples, and how that has translated and transferred to multi-generational trauma. And so I've done a lot of work around this, and I continue to. I think reconciliation isn't something that just starts, and stops, or you begin learning and you stop learning. You have to continue to learn. Reconciliation and learning about Indigenous peoples is an ongoing process. So showing up for Indigenous peoples, listening to them, learning from the elders, and from the multi-generational impact has been something that I've been deeply involved in. I've raised Indigenous issues. I'm in the top, I think, in British Columbia since I got elected. So it's something that is really important to me, and to fight really hard against the systemic racism and the policies that the federal government continues to impose on Indigenous peoples, and fighting for change and for true reconciliation. And, the implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, and the missing and murdered Indigenous women's calls to justice. The government needs to implement them. They need to stop fighting Indigenous people in court, especially Indigenous children. And I'll be continuing to fight alongside with Indigenous people.
Awesome, thank you, Gord. Susan of the Liberal Party, you're next, please.
Hello. My education about the Indigenous people of this coast really began in earnest when I was working up north in Prince Rupert. It didn't take too long to figure out that working with the Haida, the Gitxsan, Tsimshian, the Central Coast First Nations was absolutely critical to delivering a fisheries management program across the coast. And I was selected as part of the team led by the Deputy Minister of Fisheries and Oceans to begin to develop the Aboriginal Fisheries Program, which signaled a major shift in the work that Fisheries and Oceans would do with First Nations, recognizing rights for food, social, and ceremonial fisheries, building capacity in communities to do the kind of stewardship activities so important to First Nations. So I certainly have learned a lot, both in the North Coast and the South Coast, through a variety of experiences, living in the communities, being in communities when they're in conflict, being in communities when there are celebrations. I've learned a lot, and I understand that reconciliation is something that must move faster, must start to take place on the ground. Where it pertains to Indigenous education, I mentioned earlier the 500 million over 4 years to support Indigenous operated post-secondary institutions, and recently announced a new education policy framework supported to do that, to work on information sessions on education transformation, the establishment of technical tables, the development of the agreements with whatever group the First Nation wants to do education with, comprehensive funding arrangements, clear and defined roles and responsibilities, mutual accountabilities. These are making moves to make this happen.
That's 2 minutes.
Improve Indigenous education in a way that is directed.
Suzanne, please.
My partner was a First Nations man, and most of my children and grandchildren are First Nations. I've lived and learned from the First Nations people. I love where most of them are coming from as far as their relationship to the planet. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People said it explicitly, and that was enclosed in our Truth and Reconciliation Commission that spent many years and many millions of dollars to remember that First Nations you have to have free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples before doing anything in their territory. And I think because I was involved in the Mares Island blockades, and it went to the Supreme Court of Canada, where Aboriginal title was recognized and went down in the history books of Canada, that Aboriginal title and rights for traditional uses and for understanding and speaking for the land is something that we all have to listen to. It's part of our lives. It's how we will move forward. I heard one elder from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission saying that they speak for the earth. He said, it was Elder Dave Couchet. He said, I speak on behalf of Mother Earth. This is our responsibility. It's the kind of leadership that we must reflect on as people. And I know that we can't continue down the path we have been, where corporations continue to divide people, where the governments don't recognize that free, prior, and informed consent, and that we have to respect that. And that when we start working together, I know with Mares Island that if it wasn't for the First Nations and non-First Nations working together, we would never have gone to the Supreme Court. It's powerful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Barbara, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think we should debunk the mystery of why First Nations in Canada are in the situation that they're in. Canada was founded as a colonial project of the British Empire, and all the institutions, including the armed forces, the RCMP, were based on that colonial conquest mentality. And to this day, we suffer in Canada from a system of colonial injustice that has the Department of Fisheries and Oceans seizing lobster traps from the Mi'kmaq, that has the RCMP attacking people at Fairy Creek and the Wet'suwet'en territory and the land back movement. Until we are rid of those vestiges of colonialism, the only reconciliation the successive governments of Canada, the Liberals and Conservatives that have been in power since the country was established, the only reconciliation they understand is that the Native people, the First Nations, Indigenous people, Inuit, and Métis Nation should reconcile themselves to the status quo. And that is unacceptable. We have to move forward by establishing a new relationship between Canada, Quebec, the Inuit, Indigenous nations, and the Métis Nation on the basis of equality and nation-to-nation relations. And until that is established, then there's the paternalistic talk about what we will do for those people is part of the same problem that got us here in the first place. It needs to be overcome. It needs to be overcome by bringing into being new arrangements between people and rejecting the status quo.
Wonderful, thank you. You all answered so concisely and wonderfully that I'm actually going to scoot past the next question. I really feel like you all answered that next question in your talk now, so we're going to move on, which is going to change our speaking order a tiny bit. Give me 1 second for my brain to catch up. All right, the BC provincial government removed interest on student loans in 2019. 4 other provinces have done the same. While a step in recognizing the important role students play in the overall economy, 60% of student loans are provided through the federal purse. What is your view on charging interest on student loans? And we'll start with Susan of the Liberal Party, please.
Thanks very much. I think the relief of interest on student loans during the pandemic was certainly a signal moving forward, and now the commitment to remove permanently the interest on student loans is a pretty clear position in terms of how this party would move forward if re-elected. There are other concerns about types of loans, how those might be used, when they may be forgiven or delayed or paused. There's a crystal clear recognition and specific actions to address the problems of student loans, paying them back, and the interest, not only the interest itself, but the timelines and the requirements, and, for example, the opportunity to pause for 5 years should someone have a child, which sometimes happens to students. At least I know some of my own children have had that happen to them.
Wonderful, thank you. Suzanne? You'll need to unmute, please, dear.
I think that interest on student rates is appalling and it should be abolished across the country. I also think that it's a very big consideration that we should actually address having no student loans, that we should forgive student loans, that these young people aren't burdened with trying to pay back something that really should have been a right, should have been a part of our society that incorporated them into it. How to start your life off with a huge debt like that is appalling, really. So I think that it would be really important that not only do we establish funding for students, I think it would be good that students have to pay a certain amount for their university education or college or their trades, but I think it has to be something that they can actually be affordable for them, that they can work towards and to be able to contribute towards that whole thing. But then I think we need to subsidize the remainder and establish a society that has a good possibility for everyone being able to have a decent education and to be able to find the knowledge that they desire, whether it's in trades, whether it's in colleges, whether it's just an apprenticeship. I think we need to just make this all accessible to people, and then I think they might start feeling that they're more a part of the society and can contribute. I think that they need to be encouraged to build on what they're interested in, whether it be a trade, whether it be applied arts, whether it's And so I don't want interest rates, but I would also like to see the loans forgiven, and I think they've done that in many countries, and they will. So something to really consider. It doesn't mean that it's all going to be borne by the government, but it would also, and it would be subsidized by the governments, but also enabled by the students as well to a certain degree. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Barbara, please.
Thanks. Well, I've already stated my view that education, post-secondary education, should be free to everyone. Not only should post-secondary education be free, but the financial support that students need to be able to continue their education should also be considered a responsibility of the society. The benefits of education do not pertain just to the individual who gets the education. They pertain to the society. And I want to take a minute to talk about the relationship between the crisis in healthcare and the irrationality of our education system. Right now, across the country, we have a crisis of staffing in healthcare, of care aides, of technicians, of technologists, of literally every profession and every classification in healthcare. And why is that? To a large extent, it's because our educational system has limited number of spots. We can only train so many radiologists. We can only train so many techs, as if it's a mystery that someone else is controlling the situation. It's nuts. If we had an education system that was based on what does the society need, how many healthcare professionals do we need? How many trades workers do we need? How many tech workers do we need? And the education system was there to support people to go into those areas where they're needed, then you would see a huge difference, and it would not be presented to us as a crisis for which there is no solution. The healthcare situation, what they're experiencing in Alberta and in other provinces right now, could easily happen in British Columbia because of the irrationality of the system. So free post-secondary education, support for students, and recruiting students for the professions and classifications that are needed throughout the society. Needed.
Great work. Thank you. Gord?
Yeah, so you've heard us already. I talked about our commitment, $4.2 billion, and that money's going to come from the super rich, the ultra rich. They can afford it. A 1% tax on wealth over $10 million to pay for the things that we need. Education, to ensure that students get up to $20,000 refundable, to stop interest. Our goal is to make university obviously free, but we want to make sure that that we want to get started on it. And a wealth tax and ensuring that big corporations pay their fair share, ending CEO stock option loopholes, ending the free ride to the corporate welfare that's right now happening to big corporations is something that we prioritize. We've got a human resource crisis right now. We've got an aging population. People are scared to go to school. They've got an affordable housing crisis that's happening, an affordability crisis, all these barriers, and tuition and interest and all of the debt load is discouraging people to go back to school or to continue their education. We look at the nurse shortage that Barb just talked about, and doctors and early childhood educators. I was in Comox Valley yesterday meeting with some of the champions there. They're short early childhood educators. There's 600 spots that they need to fill right now. And if we're going to have a national childcare plan, we need to get people going now and training those early childhood educators, and they need to get paid a fair wage. We need to ensure that we improve the wages for people so that when they come out of school, that they're guaranteed some good wages. And, we talked about Indigenous people and the challenges around that. It's in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, that we provide sufficient funding to close identifiable educational achievement gaps within one generation. That's not happening. And especially it's starting at early ages. We've heard Cindy Blackstock, and we've seen the federal government spending tens of millions of dollars fighting the decision at the Human Rights Tribunal, fighting children in court. And the Liberals continue to carry on the same fight that the Harper Conservatives did. They need to stop fighting Indigenous children in court, especially when it comes to education.
Thank you, Gordon. So the next question comes from one of the attendees from this evening. So I would like to hear the candidate's position on the removal of open net salmon farms to protect the wild stocks and develop a sustainable land-based industry. We're going to start with Suzanne, please, of the Green Party. You're still muted, dear. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I have been working to try to, like I said, the first thing I did with the environmental movement was to try to protect the wild salmon, and doing a film called the BC Chainsaw Massacre that was destroying a lot of the salmon rivers on the west coast, and I could see that they couldn't go up the rivers because the siltation was causing them to suffocate. And now we've got chemicals and parasites, diseases that are getting into the wild populations. We've got little fish going into the pens, feeding on whatever and being fed on by the poor fat salmon that are captured in the pens. I think it's one of the worst things we could have ever done to the salmon that have been an indicator species and have given us so much here on the coast. They've supported us. My flesh and blood is salmon. My children, we've all been raised with salmon, and I honor and love them so much. It's such a privilege to see them going up the rivers and to watch all the life that depends upon them. So I think that to put them in a pen is just, it's really a cruel thing to do, something that has nurtured us and given us so much. And it's still there. There's still enough that we can actually protect our wild salmon. I signed a declaration with Get Wild, saying that pens should be removed from the water by 2025. But you know what, really, I don't think that I want to wait that long. I think that pens should be removed. My husband said something about the definition of preposterous, and it's something that's unnatural. It's contrary to nature, reason, and common sense. That's the definition in Webster's dictionary of preposterous. And honestly, to tell you the truth, I think tree farming and fish farming are preposterous. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Barb, we'll hear from you next, please.
Yeah, I'm conditionally opposed to open net salmon farming. I think all the evidence has been provided that it is extremely harmful to the Pacific wild salmon, introducing a foreign species, and the methods that are used are not compatible with protecting the wild salmon. It's notable to me that the decision to have the open net salmon farms was not a decision made by any British Columbian. It was a decision made by Norwegian monopolies that do this work all around the world with the same consequences everywhere. Damage to the native fish, and the argument that there are jobs that will be lost if the open net salmon farms are ended makes absolutely no sense, because there are many jobs that can be opened up in things like sustainable forestry and milling and pulp mills and secondary manufacturing and other ways to take advantage of the resource wealth of British Columbia to benefit British Columbians, and not Norwegian monopolies or American monopolies in forestry or anyone else. So I don't buy the argument that we have to keep them because there are jobs. There are lots of jobs available in sustainable industries as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Gord, please.
Sure, this is something that I'm very passionate about. I mean, we've had a long-standing policy for the federal NDP to support the movement of open net salmon farming to close containment. We saw the Liberals make a promise in 2019 that they were going to move to close containment by 2025. Then after the election, they changed it to have a plan to move it by 2025. I mean, that's how ridiculous it got. They made a clear commitment to Canadians. Now they backtracked. Now it's not even in their platform. And, you know, this is disgraceful. I tabled a bill on this exact issue to move to closed containment, but with a transition plan. And they did the right thing supporting Indigenous communities on the Discovery Islands decision, which was in the Cohen Commission. And if they clearly followed through with the Cohen Commission recommendations, we wouldn't be in the state we're in. The mismanagement of conservative and liberal governments on the fishery, and especially on wild salmon, is exactly why we are seeing record lows of returning wild salmon and sockeye salmon in the largest salmon-bearing river in the world, which is the Fraser. And we saw that last year. The year before was the lowest. We haven't seen action. The government can't both be an agent for salmon farming as well and be the promoter of the industry. How can there be true transparency and trust within our communities if that's what's happening? We know that Conservatives are going to back up salmon farming ahead of protecting wild juvenile migrating wild salmon at no end. There's no end to it. We need money put aside for Indigenous communities as we transition, for workers as we transition, and we need to transition quickly. Wild salmon are in absolute trouble. I also signed the declaration, and I've raised this issue, been relentless at the Fisheries and Oceans Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. I'm pushing for movement to close containment. And we've seen, obviously, disease, escapes, sea lice that is uncontrollable and at levels that is unacceptable. And, you know, the chances of juvenile migrating wild salmon in those areas is very low, as we know. And we've seen die-offs, and they haven't dealt with them properly. And we need action. The wild salmon emergency.
Sorry, Gord, that was 2 minutes. Susan of the Liberal Party, please.
Thank you. My major concern with this issue, which definitely is a public policy issue, is the exclusion of the mayors of the communities and the First Nations who are engaged in the industry. Like the Ahousaht First Nation, the Talopiat First Nation, the Kitasoo First Nation, 2 First Nations in Port Hardy, and Weeweekan and Cape Mudge in Campbell River, among others, as well as those non-Indigenous people. So my major concern with this is the lack of involvement of those people who will be front on affected by this this movement towards the removal of salmon net farms, without talking about how it's going to affect them, how those communities will be affected, what sort of transition plans may be in place. Well, it's all about the 8-second soundbite about getting net farms out of the water, and none about an integrated, sustainable solution involving those people who will be affected in places where, even if there might be ways in the future to have jobs, there are no other jobs right now. And those people have not been engaged and involved. And that's a problem that needs to be resolved, as opposed to just responding to passion without dealing with the practical aspects of the problem.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We're going to move to closing statements. Everyone's done such a great job, and thanks for being here. So we're going to go in our same order. We're going to go Barbara, Gord, Susan, and then Suzanne. So Barbara, 2 minutes closing statement, please.
Okay, I'm just setting my timer.
Nice.
Oh, give me a second to set my timer. Okay, I want to pick up on something that Gord said about hope. He was speaking about youth, about students, that they need hope. And I want to talk about where hope comes from. And I think it comes from being in control of your situation. I don't think it comes from handing over your rights to someone else to make decisions for you. So hope means speaking in our own names. Over the course of the pandemic, an interesting thing has happened. Many people, workers in precarious jobs, workers in healthcare and education, students, youth, women, have all spoken out very loudly in terms of what they need from the society and what is theirs by right. It's not a favor to have education, to have healthcare, to have housing. It's a right that belongs to you by virtue of your humanity and by virtue of your membership in the polity in Canada. So the hope comes from speaking in your own name. Hope comes from looking at ways to change the situation, to discussing how to solve problems that are facing the society in our collectives, at our workplaces, in the educational institutions, and making our proposals and putting them into action. That is where hope comes from. I want to also just speak a little bit about salmon farms and how we have to accept the status quo. And I don't agree with that. I think we need to start saying the status quo is unacceptable, it's unsustainable, it has to be changed. This is our stand. How do we make it happen? I think that's very, very important. I think that's where the hope comes from. Thank you. I will wrap up there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Gord, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to respond to a few things tonight before I do dive into my closing. I mean, the Liberal candidate just talked about sound bites. Well, I can tell you, the Liberal government made the decision to close those salmon farms in the Discovery Islands, the right decision to do. And the minister said within 2 weeks, she'd have a plan to help support those workers. It's August. There's no plan. They don't understand transition. They shut fishing in the North Coast as fishers were going fishing in the wild salmon fishery. They don't understand the impact on families. And there is a way forward. Investing in Indigenous communities, in Indigenous protected conservation areas, this can be done. But conservation is over and above all jobs, all industry, everything. And the Liberal and Conservative governments do not understand it. When you have 300,000, 350,000 migrating wild sockeye in the largest river in the river system in the world that had 10 million sockeye not too long ago. Clearly, the government needs to take action, not words. These aren't sound bites. This is a serious situation. When it comes to youth and all the things we talked about, affordable housing, pharmacare, dental care, mental health supports, tuition, we can do it. We can tax the super wealthy and end tax havens. We can afford it. They can afford it. They can afford to pay a little bit more to help make your future better. There's a climate emergency happening right now, and the deficits that we're running are huge deficits in terms of climate emergency costs in future generations that young people are going to inherit. We need to take the pressure off them. We need real action when it comes to climate change and not sound bites. We need action. We need investments, and the money is there. And fossil fuel subsidies. Invest in the things that are going to improve our future and tackle these critical issues. We need to invest in tackling, providing housing for the homeless and taking real action on the opioid crisis. No more sound bites. Real action. If it's a health issue, listen to health professionals to give you guidance on how to address it. That's what I'm going to be fighting for if I'm sent back. People can count on me to do that, to bring solutions and get things done. Because that's what I've been doing for 6 years, and I will fight for our coast. That's what I've done my whole life, and people can count on me to do that. And I'm asking you to support me in this election, to go back.
Sorry, Gord, that's over 2 minutes. Susan from the Liberal Party, please.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think, as I said at the outset, it was a hard decision for a person who's never been involved in politics to decide to step up, as it has been, I'm sure, for all my colleagues. And I'm learning something about that over this campaign period. But I think I bring to this set of problems, an enormous set of problems, a lot of experience in dealing with complex and challenging problems, both as a senior public servant, where I've been able to see how government works, not being a politician, but seeing how it works. And I have 40 years of experience in resource management. And you know what resource management means? It means getting together people to resolve problems, people who are polarized in their views, people who don't know how to work together, people who have all different information and perceptions, bringing them together, sharing information, having people talk to each other face to face where they can understand the kind of issues that each of them are facing, rather than just going to whoever the loudest squeaker is. And that really is the source of sustainable solutions. Adaptation to climate change. The Liberal government rebuilt the Fisheries Act that had been stripped by the previous Conservative government. They built in the first ever rebuilding and strengthening provisions. They rebuilt a Fisheries Act and strengthened environmental assessment. And in the spring of this year, announced $647 million for a Pacific salmon strategy. And I'm grateful that my colleague was able to support the cries that came from stewardship groups, from harvesters, from First Nations across British Columbia, demanding a response from the government on this. This response looks at stewardship and conservation.
Sorry, that is the 2-minute mark. Suzanne, please.
Thank you. I've heard a lot of interesting ideas, very good ones, and I really honor everyone involved in this this conversation tonight. And to all those who are listening, thank you. This is how we learn. This is where we're going to go forward. I think we're living in times of great change and great opportunity. Our young people are the ones that we have faith in, and we have to support them. Ensure that they are going to be able to lead the way in a very different society. I think it's a time of waking up, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think we can, transition to a road of health and well-being, prosperity, and a good, healthy environment for all the life on the earth, not just human beings. Because without that, we would be destitute. So I think that we need a government that we can trust and have faith in, that doesn't lie and tell you one thing and then do another. Why should First Nations be persecuted for standing up and trying to protect their territory? These people who are making so-called noise have great reason to do that. I know that when we started to try to fight for the overall forest, 50% of Blackfoot Sound was gone, and all the best had gone, and the fish were dying, and so were the bears, and so many things were so negatively affected. We have to recognize that these people who are speaking out, it takes a lot of energy to do that, and we have to pay attention to every single voice. Transitioning from net chems isn't a bad thing. First Nations here in this territory are developing seaweed production. They're developing natural wild foods and alternative positive businesses that are based on a good, healthy environment. Without a good, healthy environment, we're all going to be lost. And I really thank you all for this opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to thank the candidates for stepping forward into this hugely important role of leadership. I'm wishing you and yours the very best as we get closer and closer to the 20th. I want to thank everybody who's attended tonight. Your engagement in your riding is so important. We hope tonight's conversations will help inform your decision making. I would like to point out that friends who vote together stay together, so make voting a team effort this year. Take another friend with you to your polling station, and if anybody here has any barriers to get to a polling station, I know that many parties will help you get there, and there's lots of information about how to access that through free transit as well. If anyone's feeling stuck, you can reach out to your Students' Union and we'll point you in the right direction. Again, huge thank yous to everybody for being here tonight. I thank you to my staff for sticking around for the evening time as well. And I really appreciate everyone's ambition in this realm. It's really fantastic. Wishing you all very well. I'm gonna put up the virtual applause. Thank you all for coming. Have a great night.